good and your articles are so interesting. If only I knew what they meant. Yeah, I understand that.
We have someone commenting in the chat window. He says, "Hi everyone, Jeevan here. I have a very bad Wi-Fi, but I'm a fifth year PhD student at the Department of Computer Science. I will be defending my thesis next semester. I thought 3MT thesis will be a chance to share my research."
Yes, awesome. And it sounds like a lot of people are in similar places, you know, with pending defenses coming up, a lot of proposals that you're working on. And really, we could spend the rest of the year talking about, you know, communication skills. Like this could be a full class, but what I am hoping you can come away with tonight is a few templates and a few quick skills that you can use to check in to make sure that you feel like the way that you're talking to people helps get your message across. And so whether that is a proposal, a 3-minute synopsis of your thesis, or your whole defense, there are ways that we can package that information for a lot of different kinds of communication. So feel free at any point. I really love to have a slightly more interactive space. I also want to recognize not everybody's got great Wi-Fi. You might be sitting around in your PJs. You might be doing the dishes while you're listening. So no pressure to keep your camera on. You're welcome to if you would like. And you're also welcome to engage by, you know, popping some questions into the chat as well. And I'll ask a couple more questions as we go along. So if anybody has thoughts that they'd like to share. Let's see. So I want to make sure we start in a spot that is helpful. So we're just going to go right to the meat of all of it. Shorter is harder. So one of the reasons that the 3-minute thesis is an effective tool and will help you with proposal writing and will help you with your defense and will help you as like throughout your entire research career is because it is really, really, really hard to distill complex information into a smaller, very bite-sized format. So it is worth keeping in mind right up front that all of the frustration and confusion and nitpicking over word choice does help in the long run when you're working on a 3-minute thesis. And are you all, have you shared out some of like the previous competition videos and things like that?
Yes, we do have it on the website, but we also have panelists here. So after your session, we have a discussion with the previous year winners panelists so that our participants can get some more insights.
Yes, awesome. You all are going to learn a lot from them as well, because they're going to have like the inside scoop. I can tell you all the big picture stuff, but they will have some of the details that will help fill it in. So big picture, shorter is harder, and shorter is harder, but it doesn't have to be hitting your head up against the keyboard all the time. So there are only 3 things that you need to keep in mind, and that is who, what, and how. If you start with the what, which is what most of us, especially if we have an academic background, we want to tell you what is your research about? What are you studying? What am I going to be talking about? What am I including in my slides? That is the what. That is like the actual content that you're working with. But if you start there, you're missing a really, really important first step. So forget about the what. You already know the how. This is a 3-minute thesis. You already have a clear structure for it. So we're going to come back to the what and how later. We're going to start with the very first part, and that is who. So either pop into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. When you're doing a 3-minute thesis, who are you talking to? Who are you presenting for?
Sean says in the chat, everyone. Greg mentions people unfamiliar with our work. And then Marina says a general non-expert audience.
It has been so exciting over the last few years to see some of these answers evolve. So when I first started at Michigan Tech, and that was 7 years ago, I just recently switched to ESIP. I've been here less than a month. You know, it used to be, yes, here are my answers I was expecting. Yes, we usually say the general public. We usually say like a general audience, the lay public. And yes, those are definitely like the broadest groups that we could possibly be reaching. But how often do we get to stand up on a soapbox and tell the rest of the world about our work? Not very often, right? It's kind of hard for us to stand here in Houghton or Hancock and have somebody in London hear us, to have somebody down in Sao Paulo hear us. So even though things like Twitter and Facebook and social media and all of our digital media certainly amplifies and helps us reach much broader audiences, we actually have to think about our audience as being really, really specific. Because if we start trying to talk to everyone, it's really hard, because everyone also includes toddlers. It might include your grandmother. It might include somebody who is politically opposed to you. So if you start to include everyone that you're trying to reach, you're not going to reach everyone. And so the very first thing when we start thinking about communicating, whether it's a proposal, whether it is a 3-minute thesis, whether it is talking to your partner about what your work is about, you have to start thinking about the other person first. And it gets really, really specific. So let's do that with the 3-minute thesis. Who specifically is going to be sitting in the audience? Who's going to be on the other side of your Zoom interface listening to you talk? Throw out some guesses. This is also some guesswork for me. So I'm kind of hoping some of our panelists might weigh in, because they maybe have seen some of those folks. Well, maybe let's try it this way. Raise your hands if you think that most of the people, yes, all right, so I see some other answers coming in. Yep, so there's some tech employees who are there, definitely some administrators, there's other grad students, there might be professors, and raise your hand if you think that these are people who have an understanding of your field of research. And I'm not talking about your specific project, but your field of work. Yes, there's definitely friends and family out there as well. All right, so interesting. So how many of you, raise your hand if you think that this is going to be a group that doesn't understand your field of research, that they may not even like be familiar with some of the basic terms that you would use in a title in your abstract. All right, seeing a few more raised hands here. Yes, a lot more raised hands. All right. Yeah, no, and I kind of presented this as a little bit of a dichotomy, right? I presented it as a choice. Do they understand your work or do they not understand your work? In reality, most people are going to understand your work to some degree. So raise your hand if you think that this is going to be a group of people who you are going to be able to explain your work to in 3 minutes. Or at least that you're hoping to. Yes. Appreciate the optimism out there. Yes. Yeah. So definitely. And in order to figure out what you need to say in 3 minutes, you need to know what the group on the other side, the other people that you're going to be talking to, you just need to know how much information they do or don't have. So a great place to start is to work with what we call listening palettes. So we're going to do a quick little exercise. You can either do this kind of like in your own space informally, especially if you're, listening in and doing the dishes or taking care of chores. If you've got access to the chat, you're welcome to pop information in there. If you've got your space and you're willing to have your camera on, you're also welcome to participate visually. So we're going to do a little exercise. We are going to start off with some super, super simple listening palettes. And a listening palette is just a specific way to look at a space. And we're going to start off super simple. I would like you to write down in the chat or to unmute yourself and tell me 3 circles that you see in your space. And I'll demonstrate so we can do this kind of together. So you're just looking around your space. You're going to look for 3 circles. I see that I've got my camera up in front of me. I've got my the period, the run-on sentence killer poster behind me, one of my favorites. And you know what? One of my little planters over there is also a circle. So tell me some of the circles you're seeing in your space. Great, I'm seeing some things come through the chat. We're looking for circles. Very simple listening palette, just circles. And then you start seeing circles everywhere, right? You're like, she said 3, but now I've got. Excellent. Yes. Oh, bubbly can. Yes. Yeah. So you all can kind of start to appreciate, right? Like if we put on a super simple lens here and we are simply looking for circles, we can definitely start to find some stuff. So let's make this a little more complicated. We're going to add a human layer onto this. I would like you to see 3 things that bring you joy. So when you look at it, it just makes you happy when you see it. I'll demonstrate again. I really love this peace lily behind me. It's one of the reasons it's always here in my office space. I have a poem that I keep over on the side that makes me kind of happy. And you know what? I really love, I have a big old, I don't know what to call it, mural, big art thing that I also look at over this way. And that also makes me happy. So tell me some of the things, 3 things that make you happy in your space. Ooh, tapestry. That was the word I'm looking for. Yeah, I have a tree of life tapestry over there that I look at when I'm at my computer. Oh, critters. Yes. My puppies finally fell asleep and they're not kayaking in the background anymore. Cool. I kind of like you guys' spaces. When my code compiles, yes. Most definitely. Things that make us happy. All right, so that's still kind of a simple one, right? But when we start to think about happiness, things could start to get a little more complicated, right? So now we're going to stick with things that make you happy, but we're going to think about it from somebody else's perspective. So I want you to look around your room and find 3 things that would make your mother happy in your space. I think, let's see. My mom would probably like how many plants that I've gotten here. And for once in my life, I have a room that is like somewhat tidy that I'm working in. She'd probably approve. And one other thing that my mom would like. Oh, I've got a big giant chunk of gypsum that I keep on my desk. And I know she loves that. Gypsum is a rock, by the way, in case there are any other geo nerds out there. Yes, I see some other good ones. Yep, yourself, yes. Yeah. Good data. Lots of good stuff, yes. So even just moving through those 3 simple listening palettes, we're starting to engage completely different parts of our brain. So as very social creatures, the way that our brains work, we're really interested in connecting with other people. And ironically, at the same time, we're kind of bad at it. So we might be really good at having a conversation. We might be really good at, connecting with somebody over dinner and chatting. Some of us are good at small talk and like to introduce ourselves and, learn more about new people. And for most of us, we're actually naturally really, really bad at storytelling. So when we're thinking about storytelling, we often forget about one, who we're talking to. So it's easy to forget the other person who's receiving the information. And two, the other part that we forget too is that most stories, when we think about it as like a novel or a good movie, they have a beginning, middle, and end, right? There is a plot. There is a clear transition from one thought into another, and they all kind of make sense and they weave together. That is not naturally how the human brain works. It's just not the neurology that we're set with. And so I think it's really good when we start talking about communication to remember our own pitfalls. We love good stories. We love watching a good movie. We love reading a good book. It is really, really hard to create a good story to share with somebody else. And most of the time, it comes down to whether or not we have listened and attuned to whether or not the people we're talking to are there with us. So who really, really matters? So let's talk about that again in terms of the 3-minute thesis. So if we're thinking about a 3-minute thesis, this is going to be other grad students. This is going to be professors. It's going to be people in the academic community. So they're obviously really smart. They, don't get into the positions that they're in without being really intelligent. All of you on this call are really intelligent. You're quick learners. You've got skills. The thing that you're missing is maybe the specific language, the specific vocabulary that enables somebody else's project. So the number one thing that we can do is look at what kind of technical language that we're using. And if you ask yourself, is this person going to know when I say cloud computing, are they going to know exactly what that means, or am I going to have to explain that? Earlier, I used, I offhandedly said, I've got a chunk of gypsum sitting on my desk. I can't always assume that everybody is going to know that that's a really cool hydrated, it's a very beautiful mineral. I feel like I need to show it to you now so that we can all be on the same page. But see, show and tell. Would you all have pictured this if I just said gypsum offhandedly? Maybe not. So when we're thinking about the who, we got to think about how quickly we think somebody would absorb that information, and we do what's called scaffolding. So we start where they're at. We're not going to try to work from where we are and find our way to them. We're just going to make some base assumptions about, like, I don't think you're going to know a whole lot about that. I'm just going to lay down some quick groundwork. I'm going to explain some of the key terms, and then we're going to take off on this awesome story. And then that's what brings us into the what and the how. And like I said earlier, for the 3-minute thesis, the how is really easy. It's already been defined. You have to talk about your thesis and your thesis topic in 3 minutes. That's not very much time. So that really determines the what. What information do you get across? So out of curiosity, how many of you, and go ahead and pop this into the chat or feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. How many of you know exactly what interests other people about your work? And if you feel like you know it, just like pop it into the chat. What interests other people in your work? And if you're drawing a blank, give me a fun emoji reaction. Yes, Shreya, that's very true, the cloud chamber. Nice, Sean. Yes, the ecological services that a wetland creates, speech recognition, space stuff. Yes, everybody loves space stuff. We start talking cosmos and we get detailed about it. People get lost, but they're like, I talk about stars, and everybody loves that. Noisy neighbors. Ooh, That sounds like a cliffhanger. I really want to know more about research that affects everyone who has noisy neighbors. That sounds fantastic. That sounds like you're opening into your 3-minute thesis statement right there. Biofuels, yes. Yeah, so actually, a lot of you already have a good sense of, what generally people are interested in your work, right? So all you have to do is connect the dots. You know that people care about, okay, let's take Rob's example here, right? So hurricane disturbances, a lot of people are very interested in hurricanes. They're also tend to be interested in hurricanes throughout different seasons. And so if you're then connecting that to the very specific nitty-gritty work that you might be doing, because most of us are not talking about this topic in general. We don't have Savada's example, we don't have like just biofuels as like the main topic defense, right? Savada, would you mind saying like what your dissertation specifically is about, or what some of the methods are that you use?
Sure. So my research is focused on characterizing microbial inhibitors found in drought stress switchgrass, and switchgrass is a promising feedstock for second generation biofuel.
Awesome. Well, heck, I don't even think you need me here because you're well on your way to like distilling all of that down. But that does get more specific, right? Like when we start talking about switchgrass and we start talking about some of the specific genetic mechanisms of it, that does get a little bit more complicated, right? And so, like Savada just did, you can start to scaffold some of that information. So biofuels, everybody pretty much gets. So what's the next layer there? Well, a lot of people are familiar with switchgrass, so maybe we can bring that in. And then you can bring in the next pieces and start to get people deeper into your research. I like to think of that as an invitation into your work rather than trying to start from the inside of your work and finding your way back out to other people. So the what is an invitation. The who matters the most, and your how is already set. So I have many, many, many tools that I can throw at you, but I want to keep it fairly simple tonight so that you all feel like you've got a pretty clear sense of how you could work with the who, what, how to help you structure the story that you're going to create in a 3-minute thesis. So I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any questions, or do you have any follow-up? Do you feel like you need some follow-up information to connect it specifically to your work? What do you need to know? Or you can also say, if like, whoa, this is still so high level, I feel like I don't understand how this connects to the 3-minute thesis yet. You can also let me know that, and I will do a better job scaffolding there too. So feel free to pop that into the chat or unmute yourself. What do you need to know to apply the who, what, how to creating your 3-minute thesis? Does anybody feel ready to like, I can sign off right now and I can go create this. I'm totally 100% ready. Cool. Well, we'll see if any more conversation comes into the chat. One thing, just to connect it for other folks, and let me know if there are specific kinds of information that you want. Oh, good question. Okay. Actually, that's really perfect, because that's what I was going to talk about, specifically bringing it back to the technical language versus what we would say for a general audience. So in the 3-minute thesis, people like details. So like, imagine when you are reading a really good book, if an author skips over a scene and they're not providing enough information to like create a setting in your mind, it's kind of hard to get into, you know, the descriptions of the characters or whatever else if you can't actually connect, right? So as humans, we do like details, we like specificity. However, it's important to remember that a lot of us with any sort of academic background have learned details that carry a lot more knowledge packed into a single term. So for an example, if I say NASA, not everybody is going to know that NASA is the National oh gosh, I'm going to mess it up because it's an acronym I use all day, every day, right? And I hardly ever have to explain NASA is, you know, our space administration. And sometimes acronyms are really ones that we want to stay away from. Don't assume that anybody knows an acronym. So if you're used to working with what's a good example? Tessa, this might actually connect to some of your work. So if we said like the TOR pathway, not everybody's going to know what that means. We're going to have to explain, you know, kind of its health implications and how it's a really important part of just being a mammal on this planet, and how it, you know, is a key piece of evolution through time. That was kind of a bad explanation, but it was an example I wanted to bring up. So acronyms, avoid acronyms. 2, if there is information that carries a lot of, if there's a word that carries a lot of very specific information. So like last year, I'm blanking on his name right now. He did a really great job with his 3-minute thesis. He was the Michigan Tech winner. We ended up having a 20-minute conversation about a single word that he had opted for using on one of the slides because it had a very specific meaning in, yes, Jordan Ewing, thank you. Jordan had a very specific word that had a very specific meaning in his field, but it had a connotation that was very different if it was a layperson. And sometimes it's really hard to know what those words are. So an example may be a rock. As a geologist, a rock has a very specific meaning to me. But a lot of people would look outside and see a pile of stones and think that those are just rocks, you know? So it is helpful when you, especially if you're not sure, if you have too much jargon or too much technical information, run it by somebody who doesn't know your work. That could be a housemate, that could be a partner, that could be a family member. I'm sure there are very many patient siblings and parents and aunts and uncles out there who are willing to listen to you practice. And it just takes practice, practice, practice. So especially with a 3-minute thesis, you basically have to memorize it. It is, I've got a background in theater and dance, and so I'm used to memorizing a lot of choreography. I've had to memorize lines and songs before. In my experience, the 3-minute thesis starts to tap into some of that work a little bit more. And I don't mean that to sound intimidating, like, hey guys, learn to choreograph your 3-minute thesis. I mean it as there are other groups of people who have skills who might help you. So if you're worried about having too much technical information, practice and run it by other people. If you feel like your practice is making it feel awkward or it's feeling frustrating, go to the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. They use different theater improv exercises to help you get out of your shell and help you be more natural as you learn to memorize and learn to communicate. And there are also a lot of other resources. So if you're part of a professional society, almost every single one of them now has some sort of science communication or engineering communication resources out there. So it may be a person that you could talk to. It may be something as simple as like, hey, here are our best practices for words that we know we have to unpack in this community. Or here are ways to make sure that the language you're using is accessible and inclusive. There are tons and tons and tons of resources out there. So if you have any doubt about how much technical information to include in your work, know that details and specificity matter. That makes up the meat of your work, But if you're having trouble explaining it, start to use some of those other resources. Does that help answer that question? Cool. Any other questions out there? Ooh, this one's a good one. Yes. How to grab attention without sounding clickbaity. Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but there's a reason that clickbait works. So there's some really interesting communication studies that have come out. Ooh, and constructive feedback. We're going to come back to that one too, because there's some good stuff with that. So in terms of grabbing people's attention and not having it feel like clickbait, kind of the same approach that we take when we're thinking about how to minimize the technical language in our work. If you have any doubts about whether or not it sounds clickbaity, ask somebody else. Or if you think that it sounds like really fascinating and really exciting, but you're not sure if other people are going to, ask someone else. And I'm sure you all have lots of friends. You're also welcome to email me talks and opening lines and stuff if you want to run ideas. I'm happy to be a sounding board for that. In terms of the research that supports this, so in the communications field, we're really interested in how quickly we capture somebody's attention and how long we can keep their attention. There's some really fascinating podcasts about this on Hidden Brain, if anybody wants to check those out. The most recent studies that I've seen have been different eye tracking studies that they do on various news websites. And basically, humans don't have great attention spans, especially in our digital worlds. We're so used to getting bombarded with information that we have to make decisions really, really fast about whether or not we're interested in something or not. So it's less about your title and way more about your slide. So your slide matters a lot because visuals, photos, images, maps actually activate our brain a lot faster than words do. Words make us activate a whole bunch of different parts of our brain. And so the act of reading itself is a neurological miracle, to be honest. Whereas a photo kind of gets short-circuited and goes straight to a level of understanding that we can capture a lot faster. So when you are thinking about selecting an image for your slide, I do suggest trying to go with a single image. You can overlay more things over that image, but when you start, if you don't want to capture somebody's attention, you don't want to use a clickbaity title, you don't want to rely on something that feels gimmicky, make sure you have a really beautiful photo. And it could be as simple as that. Now, in terms of the title, once you have somebody's attention with an image, in order to keep it, you have to have a good title. And that's where clickbait steps in. And that's where knowing your keywords, what are the most important words that you want to include, becomes pretty important. Shreya, does that answer your question? Sweet. Cool. So Tessa, I'm super excited that you brought up constructive feedback. So I'm kind of a process nerd, and I really love the critical response process. It's a system that was developed by a choreographer, a dancer, who had to work a whole lot with scientists. So she opted, just like through her career, she ended up working with a lot of like astrophysicists and geneticists and all of these different folks to help explain their work through dance. And she and a lot of her creative partners discovered that feedback within the scientific community and within like the theater and dance community can sometimes be really toxic. People just hand you opinions and you're like, reviewer number 2, please. So when you're getting or receiving feedback that you do or don't want, I would suggest checking out the critical response process, and I can pop that into the chat too. It's called CRP, and it's Liz Lerman, and she basically offers a way to kind of buffer getting feedback. So it's specific and it's rigorous, but it's also helpful and delivered in a more neutral and even kinder way, so that you don't get like feedback from somebody or delivering feedback to somebody else in a way that feels really crummy. Because nobody needs that. Nobody has time to feel like crap when you're dealing with feedback. So the first step that she does is that you don't share opinions right away. So if you are asking for constructive feedback from somebody, don't open it up and be like, hey, I want you to tell me what you think. Tell me what you think is inviting whatever the other person wants to tell you. Give them something really specific to focus on. So tell them, I would really like feedback on the clarity of the language that I'm using. Did you understand the technical aspects of the work that I shared? Did you like the imagery that I included? So if you give people 3 or 4 things to focus on, that will kind of help corral the constructive feedback, so you don't just get bombarded with whatever other people's opinions are. And then from there, it can naturally evolve into you getting to share opinions. And I feel like one of the most powerful things I've learned in my life so far is learning to keep my opinion to myself for a little bit longer than I think I used to. And just waiting and giving somebody a chance to share what they were thinking gives you an easier way to be like, oh, you didn't include that bad photo just because you had a reason that you thought that that photo was great. So now I can ask you about it instead of just telling you, hey, I didn't like that. So yeah, check out the critical response process, and it's Liz Lerman. Cool stuff there if you feel like nerding out. All right. So Sean, you say pretty photo, but for someone like me who's making a wetland, yeah. That's a really interesting question. So let's explore this. Basically, a photo, whether or not it's even pretty, honestly, because I've worked with different groups who are working on like reclaiming the gay stamp sands, or I'm thinking like Paul Van Susante's lab, like moon dust isn't exactly a pretty thing, but it's very visually engaging. So maybe instead of saying pretty photo, I could have said something that is visually engaging. So if it's something that you look at and it catches your eye, is maybe a better way to say that. And I would say that starting with a bare landscape, and even you could have a split screen and have a bare landscape on one side and a reclaimed space on the other. And just to follow up on that, Sean, to make sure I get your whole question, I don't think that the image has to be specific to your project. So it doesn't have to be like the site that you're working on. It could be a photo of a wetland in general, because not everybody is going to know what a wetland is. They may not have a picture of a marsh, or they may be picturing something very specific or very different than what you might be working on. So again, thinking about the information that we're conveying as an invitation into our work, because the visual is the first thing that people are going to see. I think it's okay to think of the visual as the biggest part of your work, and it doesn't have to be the big thing. Or it doesn't have to be like a big thing that is specific to your work. That's a pretty big gap, a pretty big bridge to try to put in there. And for example, I think Jordan Ewing last year, he actually had a map. So he used a metaphor last year that he like turned his visual into a little bit of a metaphor. So it continued with what he was saying, and was able to take some of his words about finding treasure and X marks the spot, and he was able to put that into his visual a little bit more. Oh, yes, I get you, Sean. Yes, yeah, not everybody is going to have something pretty or catchy, or like we were saying earlier, we may not have like a clickbaity photo, but do think about what's visually interesting in your work. And I think sometimes, especially anybody who works with spectroscopy or other microscopic images, you all have looked at those so many times and they no longer have the allure that they may to other people. So especially if there's any bright colors, if you're working with anything that has, you know, phosphorescence or luminescence or something, there's a lot of that stuff that can be really visually interesting to other people that you might be taking for granted. And again, ask somebody else. If you're like, I think this photo is really cool, what do you think? And you can ask people to participate in the critical response process with you. All right, so any other questions out there? Oh, one just came in. How do you reduce the bias of, okay, reduce the bias, for example, your research versus some other cool research? Yes, rocket science. Yes, oh my gosh, everybody totally does have a research bias. It's true. I thank you for bringing this up, because it's something that I think sometimes anybody who feels like they're not in like one of the cool kinds of science, like one of the like things that people innately love, like Marcello, I think we were talking about stars and cosmos earlier. Like if you study space at all, people are like, oh, that's amazing, it's rocket science. But there are just as many, you know, difficult, complicated, fascinating fields out there as there is in rocket science too, right? So if you feel like you're in one of the fields where people are like, what is that? I don't know what that is, then think of it again as an invitation. Like, you don't have to be in the rocket science club, or you don't have to have a charismatic megafauna that you're studying in order for things to be interesting. And if you want to see some examples of this, check out what they do in National Geographic. Check out what they do in media outlets like Wired. You know, Wired covers some really nitty gritty tech stuff, but they always do it in a way that's really fascinating and funny. You know, their brand is to be really snarky. So there are some really interesting media spaces out there. So especially if you're feeling like your work, if you feel like you're in one of those fields that is misunderstood often or mischaracterized often, or is just something that a lot of people don't understand, look it up as a simple Google News search and find some good articles that do a good job talking about your field and see how they frame it. It may help. Does that help, Javon? Cool. All right. Any other questions? Or people, how are people feeling at this point? Scale of like 1 to 10. How prepared do you feel for doing a 3-minute thesis at this point? Yes, this is a good question. Endings. Yeah, so coming back to our who being our audience, the what and the how. The what and the how really do focus on the kind of the traditional narrative structure, right? You want to make sure that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you think about it as, you know, kind of the classic plot line that we all learned in 3rd grade, which not all plot lines follow this, but it's helpful to think about, especially for 3 minutes. We want to think about reaching a point where there's kind of that like, aha, like I get it, this is so cool. And then when you're ending, remember that you don't end on the aha moment. You don't end on like the whoa. I mean, you can, but it's kind of difficult to do this. A lot of times we end with a reflection. There's a little bit of like a downswing in some of the information and our energy. So give your audience a chance to breathe. I know it's tempting in a 3-minute thesis to cram as much as possible in there, but memorize your last line. If the only things that you do, especially if you're an organic kind of like natural speaker and memorizing things is uncomfortable, memorize your opening line and memorize your closing line. And then just get really good at watching the clock in between those 2 points so that you know you've got your opener, you know what your aha moment is, and then you can finish with a little reflection. That does feel satisfying to the people that you'll be conveying this to, your audience. And how important is it to make our talks feel relatable or tangible to others? Yeah. So this is a really good one. My suggestion is to remember that you are a human being doing science. So this is not a 3-minute thesis about your science. It is you as a human talking about your science. So it does help to be relatable. And that doesn't have to mean that you're smiling and happy and super animated. You've got this beautiful photo. Like, those are some ways to be relatable. But you can also incorporate making your talk relatable by sharing a personal moment. This is not an abstract. This is not a proposal. You are going to be speaking in the first person. You're not going to be using third person. Don't try that while doing your 3-minute thesis. So it does help. And I see the folks who tend to win these things and score higher are a little bit more relatable and tangible. If you are using the 3-minute thesis as an exercise to distill down your science and you're not worried so much about winning, then don't worry about that as much. Use this as an exercise to help you work on distilling down your work so that it is concise. But if you're not as interested in winning, I don't think you have to worry about making it as relatable. But if you want to win, there's got to be a human presenting the science in that. And I would love to hear what the panelists think about that. That's my opinion. So using my critical response process language, that is my opinion. Anything else? Yeah, that's a really good question. Shreya and Savada, Nathan, do any of you know who the makeup of the panel is?
So we have 5 different people in the panel today. We have Marina Choi, Niranjan Miginakalu, and Ninat Mohale, who have been winners in our 3MT competitions in the past. We have Ranit Karmakar and Marcello Guadagno, who have been presenting their research at different platforms similar to 3MT.
Excellent. All right. Well, if that's all the questions that you all have for me, you are welcome to reach out at any point. I'm going to pop my email into the chat. I have 1,010,000 different SciComm resources, so I'm always happy to share articles or dig into anything specific. I don't have a lot of time to review whole presentations at this point, but if anybody wants to run an image or a title past me, I am all happy to be a sounding board for that. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Allison, a quick question. Did you have your presentation also go on while you were speaking, or it was just a visual thing today?
It was a visual thing today.
Awesome. Just confirming that we didn't miss on sharing the slides.
Yes, thanks for...
It was a great presentation. I'm sure all of us have learned new things today.
Cool, good. It's always a good thing if we learn something new, right?
Yep.
All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm gonna mute myself and turn off my video. I'm gonna stay on the call, but I have a puppy who needs to get rescued, so I will be back.
So let me just share my screen and we'll move on to our next session. Sorry. So guys, since we have heard so much about everything in the from Allison, would you like to, let's do an icebreaker activity wherein you describe yourself and your work in less than 15 words. Feel free to drop this in your chat window and we will take a 5-minute break before we move on to our panel discussion, next session. So we'll start our next session at 6:05. But until then, you are free to stay on the call and just do some icebreaker activity. Feel free to drop your name, department, and this, and describe your work in 15 words or less. Hello, everyone. So it's 6:05. We will move towards our next session, which is a panel discussion with 5 members in our panel. Before, I would like to welcome all of you to the panel discussion session of GSG's 3MT thesis competition training. Please use the chat feature in order to ask any questions you have. And audience discussion is highly recommended. And as we saw with the Allison session, it was very helpful to have a two-way communication than just one person speaking all the time. Uh, just so you guys know, these presentation will be recorded and it will be uploaded for the participants who are not able to attend it today. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. We have for our first panelist is Marina Choi. She is a grad student from the Humanities Department at Tech. Her expertise include public speaking and multimedia, technical and professional communication, research and writing in communication studies. You can also catch her on public speaking and communication webinar on Wednesday, October 27th. Our second panelist is Niranjan Meganakallu. Dr. Meganakallu achieved his doctorate in the Mechanical Engineering Department from Michigan Tech. He was the winner at the 3MT 2018 competition hosted at Tech. He also received the People's Choice Award in the same competition. Our third panelist is Ranit Karmakar. He is the current vice president of GSG. He is also a doctoral candidate in the ECE department. He was the winner of CMU's New Venture online competition for the Best Overall Venture Award. Our fourth panelist is Ninad Mohale. He is a PhD candidate from the Material Science and Engineering Department. He won the second place at 3MT 2020 competition. He also won second place in the oral presentation category at the Graduate Research Colloquium this spring. Our last but not the least, our fifth panelist is Marcello Guadagno. He was the student lead on the project involved in designing a moon rover called T-Rex, Tethered Permanently Shadowed Region Explorer. The design was presented at the Big Idea Challenge for 2020. The competition's goal was to demonstrate different technologies and designs to study and explore Moon's permanently shadowed regions, which the NASA officials find a formidable challenge for space exploration. With that, I would invite our panelists if they want to pitch in and introduce themselves if I missed on something. Please feel free to unmute yourself and say something if you would like to add to your introductions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarvada, for a nice introduction. I'd like to add a couple of points there.
Sure, go ahead.
Myself, Niranjan, I was also the winner of 3MT thesis in 2017, along with 18. And I was also a finalist in the Midwest Association of Grad Schools that was conducted in 2018.
That's really great. Sorry, I missed on that information.
No problem, that's fine.
All right, if other panelists do not have anything, we can get going on with our presentation today. We also have some inputs from Sagar Patel, who was the runner-up for the 2019 3MT competition, and his ideas, his recommendations you can see on your screen. I'll give you like a minute to just go through it. So he suggests that it's more about having the bird's eye view while working on the script. It's better if we organize it as we were explaining it to high school kids and practice, practice, practice. That's one of the major component of winning a 3MT. All right. So today, we will be discussing about 4 main categories for the 3MT presentations and learn more from the panelists. If there is any specific question that you have for a specific module, feel free to put your questions in the chat. Shreya will be moderating those questions. And if it's off topic, we will be discussing it in the fifth part of our panel discussion, which will be the questions from the audiences. That's how we will go forward with the panel discussion. So moving on with the first topic, that's the structure of the presentation. Here are a few question nudges that I would like the panelists to have, but you are definitely not limited to just talk on what the questions are here. Feel free to give your opinions and how you would like to, your insights on these topics. And I do not have an order right now in here. Anyone can go first, but if I see the conversation going a little afloat, I might just put you on the spot. So would any of you want to go first for the structure part of the 3MD presentation?
I can go ahead if everybody else is okay.
Sure.
So yeah, so no, let's talk specifically about question 1 and kind of about question 3. So it's essentially about how to grab somebody's attention, essentially, right? And so I think that the most important thing that you could probably have in your talk, when you start off, you need to have a hook. You need to have like some kind of an open open challenge, or like an open question, essentially, which will which you pose that question and people immediately start thinking about that, which I think is really interesting and important to have in the story. And to kind of add to it, I think that some of the most effective slides that I saw for 3MT was where you had maybe a picture, maybe an image, maybe some text, which was also the hook. It doesn't have to be like a self-explanatory slide, as long as if you have, say for example, one image and that also asks the same question that you're trying to ask in your hook. I think that could be the like an easy way to kind of grab attention.
Niranjan, I'm going to put you on this spot. You want to go next?
Okay. I think Ninad covered almost all the points that had to be explained. So with respect to the slides, with respect to the research, since it is only one slide, the challenge would be to understand or to make your slide very generic. And since we are working on very specific research areas, we somehow have to find a common hook, or it can be a common theme which can be applied to daily life. Something in the form of an image, it can be an incident, it can be a question, something like starting with, say, imagine this is what happens on a daily basis, and do you have any comments on that? So start getting the audience interest, and for that, the image can help, or you can even have some text or anything that can add on the slide, because the important thing is like the first 30 seconds, you have to get the interest of the audience. And once you get the interest, then you can start giving your research, explaining your research. But the first 10-15 seconds is where you elicit response from the audience or just get their attention. It can be in the means of the way you speak. It can be in the way of your structuring your slide. So that is where you have to concentrate on having a good image which can be related by everyone.
Marcello, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I was about to just agree with Naren. Yeah, the image is such a huge part of most presentations. Of course, the context I presented in was a bit longer than 3 minutes, so in some aspects it may be a bit easier than this, but the images to grab the crowds in are just one of the most effective tools you can do to grab people's attention. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Also, of course, getting their attention, generally, as mentioned before, and this probably get beat home a bunch of times because it's really important, is as long as you start broad with a concept that people can relate to, you can whittle down that and kind of focus in on what the purpose of your thesis is, but you just got to start broad, but not too broad. Just as long as you know your audience, you can whittle that down to how you need it.
Sure. Marina?
Yeah, I think these are really good points in terms of attention getters at the beginning of a presentation. Having questions or an image, I think, are really good points that everyone brought up. For images, I think I guess for the 3-minute thesis, you're limited, right? You can only have one slide.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. So for an image, I think it's a really powerful way of getting attention in the beginning to have like a short visualization. And someone brought that up, just saying something like, picture this or imagine that, and going into like a short description of something to to create quick visualization of something, I think is really effective.
Awesome.
I'd like
Raneet?
to add one more point.
Sure, go ahead.
The third point, which mentions that without being too text heavy, yeah, that's very, very important. Do not include too many points of text or too small text and all. Just an image, and it's what you are talking. People have to get that interest from that image, and they have to start listening to you, rather than you including too much of text in, and people start losing focus there, and they'll not be able to appreciate what you're saying.
Awesome. Raneet?
Say something, but I'm in a very noisy place. My apologies. I'm walking on the street now.
No issues.
So one thing I would definitely like to add, I agree with everything that everyone said. One quick point is, in our PhD, we are always told to focus on small area and really master that area. A competition like this, and when we are generally presenting to a broader audience, it's much more like what that small area would have a broader impact. So kind of thinking along the line of how this would affect everyone else who is not probably in our mind or do not care about very small changes, but as a bigger impact, what impact they would have on their lives. And that is a great hook that Ninad was talking about. That is an amazing hook. About the static slide, it's sometimes helpful if you put contrasting images, which kind of shows how what current process is, or what currently people are doing or not doing, and then what your process, how that thing would improve everything that you're doing. That kind of that contrast actually shows or gives a very good visual, proof of exactly what you're doing. And that's a great hook sometimes for a minimal slide. I don't know how much of it you heard, but that's something I wanted to add.
We were able to hear most of it. Thank you. All these inputs are really valuable. I think if you don't have anything else, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We can answer it now or towards the end of the session. Moving on to our next topic, speaking. So, which panelist would like to go first?
I wrote Marina.
Yeah, Marina, I'll put you on the spot. I know this is something that you teach. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let's just, I'm just looking at the questions. Sure. So how to avoid use of unnecessary jargon while presenting? I think, obviously, for the 3-minute thesis, you need to spend time thinking about the wording of the speech. And I know it's a very blanket statement, think about the wording of your speech, but literally, because you don't have a lot of time and you want to make it accessible, you do have to sort of like identify, I would say, the key terms that you're going to refer back to throughout your presentation and provide definitions. If you have to use some technical words because it's likely that you might have to, some more like complicated concepts, you need to make sure that you're providing a definition at least the first time that you're using the word and early in the speech. And it doesn't have to be like a long, complicated definition, just like something quick that provides clarification. Another thing I would say is to, so try to find a compromise where you can use some technical words if you provide definitions, but it shouldn't only be technical. And then analogies and simple examples are always like powerful ways of demonstrating things. And then just to quickly touch upon the second question, filler words. I always teach my students that filler words are okay. It's part of human communication. I know that in a competition like the 3-minute thesis, it feels more like a performance and you only have 3 minutes. So I would say there's no filler word that you can't use or you can't have. It's a filler word. Like, so you're gonna say or like, and that's okay. It's when it becomes too distracting and when it's a pattern, like you repeat it like you punctuate your sentence with it, that it becomes distracting and that it's a problem. So try to work on that if you know that you tend to use filler words. But if you are gonna say once or twice, I wouldn't think that it would make a difference in your presentation. I'll just let other people speak.
Awesome. Marcello, do you want to go next?
Oh, that's the mute buttons there again. But anyways, so in terms of how to avoid reading out of slides inadvertently, I've seen this problem happen a lot with a lot of the students in my professor's lab that I kind of oversee. And one of the easiest ways to get around this is sometimes just not to have full sentences or to just know your content well enough or you're confident enough to not have to read off the slide. Really, this is because it's a question in how confident you are in knowing your material and knowing if you can perhaps break down your idea well enough into a place where you can memorize it. I think for most people doing their doctorates, you probably know your material enough where you don't need to read off your slides immediately, or in this case, slide.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to go next? Nuranjan, Nanad, Praneeth?
Yeah, I can. I think so. There are 4 different questions, and I think the important.
So let me just put it in this first. So do not restrict yourself to the questions that are there on the screen. Just feel free to comment on a broader perspective with respect to 3MT.
I think I'll explain my experience, what I present when I presented it. So the way that I presented was I had a written script which I used and which I prepared for close to 350 words, 350 to 370. I don't exactly remember it, but it's around 350 words. And I read the content, and the first 30 seconds or 30 to 45 seconds was where I speak in generic terms, make sure that the audience is interested on what my research is, and then I explain. And I made sure that the first 30 seconds I had some keywords in the sentences that I had framed, just making sure that I remember or recollect those sentences or recollect those words, and I'll be able to frame those sentences. And then description of the research, I think everyone, since they have spent most of time on the research, they'll be able to explain what the research is about. So the next 2 minutes or so would be explaining the research. And then the last 30 seconds or 45 seconds is where we complete the story, like what we achieved to do and how does it relate to everyone else. In my case, my research was on water injection in gasoline engines. So this was essentially improving the efficiency of gasoline engines. So how does that matter to a common audience? So the hook to the story was, we just imagine that you are working out in SDC. What happens? What's the physical process that's happening? You start to sweat. So what is happening there? Body is releasing energy and water is coming out and it evaporates and body tends to cool. So using this principle, water is injected into the cylinder and it evaporates. So that's how I related related my research. And the hook was, just imagine people working in SDC and you're perspiring a lot. And afterwards, you start to feel slightly colder if you go out. What is happening? What's the physics that's driving this phenomena? So that was the hook. And then I explained my research, explained what was done. And then there was some jargon there, not the technical terms, but I tried to make it sure that it is understandable to everyone else in terms of like efficiency, fuel efficiency. What is fuel efficiency to a generic audience? What is fuel consumption? So these terms, you need to explain them. Just make sure that there aren't like more than 2 or 3 terms related to your research. And then the last 30 seconds was where I used the research on fuel efficiency and what impact does it have to everyone else in the room, essentially. So because if fuel efficiency is good, then you are paying less money on the fuel costs. And that's where my research will help. So that's how I completed the story. So I think probably have certain written script and practice that as many times as possible. And then divide that time into like first 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and then use your remaining time for explaining your research.
Awesome. Ninad, do you have any insights?
Yeah, like at the risk of since I don't want to give you the same answers because like I like to
Right.
all the answers right now were actually perfect. Just one note about so since we're talking about essentially the content of our talks, right? I think the one additional thing that I thought was really useful was once you have a script and so it's important to kind of have a script, read it out, maybe if possible to like record it or take a video of yourself with the script, and then to make adjustments so that it doesn't sound like you're reading a script. So I think there's essentially like 2 scripts involved. The first is the one where you will essentially have all of the content, and the second one is what sounds more natural as you're trying to kind of explain to an audience. So I think that's and
Awesome.
like with the last point of like how to avoid reading a slide. I think for 3MT it is really easy to avoid reading a slide because you shouldn't have any text, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, but yeah. So.
Okay. Ranit, do you have any comments?
I do not. I think they pretty much covered everything. And I'm in a less noisy place now.
Sure. So we will move on to our next topic, that is the body language. I think last year when we had other participants, other 3MT winners coming in, they all emphasized that body language is a crucial factor when presenting on a 3MT presentation. What are your feedback or your thoughts on it? This time I'll let you guys decide who wants to go first.
Yeah, sure, I'll start. I found body language to be a pretty powerful portion in most types of speaking. Sometimes we use hands to emphasize that something is big or small or important down to the point, or maybe want to introduce the audience to a new topic, or maybe walk around and introduce things to them. As long as that body language can set a tone and show them that you're confident what you're speaking, and you can kind of work them along to each point, then it becomes an effective tool, in my opinion, how to make them come to that conclusion. Also, it's really, I just have hands that move around a lot, so got to make the best of those, what I got.
Awesome. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, just to add to that point, like Rose has a 3,500 square feet long big stage. Just use it. It's got some nice spotlights as well. So yeah, absolutely use all the space you have so that you can convey the enthusiasm and the motion. Yeah, that's extremely important.
Yeah, this year we are having the finals at the Orpheum Theater. So
even better.
Yeah. Praneeth?
I think it's really important while presenting is making sure you are enjoying the presentation, because if you are not enjoying the presentation yourself and you're kind of like scared or like showing that feeling that you are not very comfortable, then that the audience also gets that feeling. So I would say just go on stage. If you practice enough, you don't have to worry about this. And also one thing, like while presenting on stage, I know it can be sometimes scary. I used to be someone who was scared of audience. So one thing I would say recommend is when you are on stage, try to look kind of away from the audience. So kind of look in the middle of the audience, somewhere at either a table or a blank table. Do not look at anyone's face or eyes directly, but at a blank space. Then the front audience would think you're looking at the back audience would think you're looking at the front audience, but you're not looking at anyone. Do not look at anyone's face. That becomes more scary. And while presenting, just enjoy your presentation. Do not worry about the time a lot. If you practice enough, you would be very smooth in your presentation, and it would be over before you even know.
That's a nice trick, Ranit. Niranjan?
Yeah, I think for me, basically, this was like a storytelling competition. Nobody is going to question you on your content, the technical aspect, because you are the expert in your field. But it is your ability to make sure that your research is as interesting as possible. So you are essentially telling a nice story about your research. So use body language, use hands, just be very positive about your research, and you have to be very enthusiastic about your presentation. And the important thing is not to get too scared about what questions might come and all. So because this is here, the 3 minutes is for you to perform. Essentially, you are the performer there on the stage, and there are no follow-up questions or anything. But it's also good to kind of leave a hook at the end as well. Like if you need some clarity, you can ask any questions like that. But just keep in mind that this is not a regular technical presentation. And it's your ability to tell a story. It's your ability to make your research very attractive to generic audience. So you have to be more passionate about telling your story essentially.
Thank you, Niranjan. Marina?
Yeah, so yes, I think body language and movement is really important, whether hand movements or your posture. And sometimes for anxious speakers, your nervousness or anxiety can get in the way of your body language. So you will be stiff or you will move around a lot. Depends on the people. So I think it's good to know what type of symptoms you may have when you get anxious, like if you tend to move or if you tend to get stiff. I find it even more obvious maybe when the person is really stiff and is not moving at all. Something with your hands is that it's good to always keep them in the front side of your body, like available to you, not in your pockets, not in your back, like some people do when they're really anxious. But maybe one good way to kind of like practice for that is when you do practice at home, first of all, do it standing like you're on stage. So you get more comfortable with moving around and using movements that should be like intentional and motivated. And maybe even record yourself presenting so you can see your own body language better when you practice. And that will help when you're on stage.
So I have a question for all of the panelists. Anybody feel free to answer it. So there were some preemptive presentation where the presenter does move with the slide as they are explaining. And there are other presentations where they just create a blank space on the slide and hook up to that corner of the slide. So in your opinion, what do you think is more effective, moving around or blending yourself with the slide in the background?
I can go first.
Mhm.
In my personal opinion, and in any case, it is always a good idea to kind of move around. The slides are not the main attraction. The person who is presenting, you are the presenter and you are the attraction. Slides are there just to help others or like guide. So in any kind of presentation, not just in 3MT, in general, it is a good idea to kind of move around, show the body gesture, and then share that warmth with the audience as well, so that they kind of feel that. Otherwise, if you kind of blend into the background, they would just see a slide, a static slide. Again, the slide is not moving, so it's a static slide, and then someone is speaking from the corner. It would kind of, they would lose interest very quickly. But if you're moving and then you have that gesture, and then they kind of follow you across the stage, they're constantly involved in the whole process. They are involved in the presentation as well, because they're following you, they're following what you're saying. So in any presentation, I feel that moving around and then, yeah, that's much more helpful.
Okay. Niranjan, I know you had all your presentations in a in-person setting. What was the best way you preferred doing it?
In person was the best way, and for people who are slightly not enough experience in speaking, in public speaking, I think the best way to practice is to do it in front of a mirror, or just see how you are moving. How is it too extravagant, or are you completely stuck at one place? Just see yourself in a mirror, or do a recording, video recording, and then see. Then you will realize whether you are moving too fast, you are moving a lot, whether you are at one place, and how are your facial expressions. And also, I think in 2018, I guess, I did a 3MT warm-up practice or dry run with Allison Mills, as well as some UMC staff also ventured. They came, actually, they helped, they gave me a review as well. This was just to make sure that what questions might be expected, or is the presentation or is the story making sense to them, just to have some diverse audience. So practice that, speak to other people who are completely unrelated to your research, and just let them give some feedback to your presentation on how your body language is and how you're speaking, because voice modulation is also very, very important. How you're speaking, it should not be like a same pitch throughout the presentation. At the beginning, you have to kind of speak in a slightly raised voice, and then when you describe, you can have some low and high pitch. So there should be voice intonation and voice modulations as well.
Awesome. Nanad, I know you presented it in a hybrid mode where your prelims were kind of virtual and in person. The finals were in person. What was your experience like in terms of specifically to body language preparation?
Oh, well, yeah, I do tend to kind of use my hands a lot when I'm talking anyway. If anything, I had to just kind of make sure that, just like Niranjan said, I just had to kind of dial it in a little bit, but for the most part, I was, so with the first round, which is like virtual, I don't know if that's the case this year. I'm guessing it's not the case.
No, both of them, they are in person.
Oh, but yeah, because it was slightly tricky to, like the other aspect of the, which was the recording of the video and all of that, which is, I'm sure is not relevant in this case, in that, so I would not have to go into details of that area. But yeah, like hand move, I mean, there's a statistic, right, that like 93% of what you say is what you're saying with your hands or your motion, essentially. So I think that actually rehearsing that along with your talk was a really, really important factor in this talk.
Awesome. Marcello, I am not I am not aware how was your presentation style like.
I see. So you're asking like what my previous presentations were in the
Yeah,
context of
yeah.
the big idea stuff?
Yeah, the big idea stuff challenge.
Okay. So I've done a little bit in both. So that one, unfortunately, was all online.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that was all online.
So
I've
feel
done
free
previous
to give,
presentations.
feel free to
Yeah,
give
I'll
your experience on it.
Yeah, most of my presentations before have been in person, usually in front of pretty large audience when talking about stuff when I used to be in charge of the aerospace enterprise. So we go out and talk to reviewers and try to show them why they should invest in our spacecraft, basically. And generally, I found that I like making eye contacts to reviewers because those are the people who I knew were going to judge me. So I let them know that I know who they are, they know who I am, and they let me basically let them know that I'm confident enough in my product that they should provide funding to us.
Okay.
Stage movements also, I said that before.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Moving on to our next section, that is last minute advice for all the presenters in here, 3MT, and even some similar competitions like Ranit and Marcello had been to. So feel free to go ahead and pitch in your thoughts on it. Ranit, would you like to go first? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure. One thing I would, at least that's something I do, and it's not it's kind of contradictory to what Niranjan was saying, but I personally do not like speaking in front of a mirror, especially when I'm talking in practice in front of a mirror. I kind of start looking how my gesture and face and body language is, and then kind of forget what I'm saying. Exactly the same reason I mentioned why you should not look directly into the eyes of the audience. So what I generally prefer is either recording myself, just audio recording, or if I'm presenting on a stage, I do a video recording. So I would say those work better for me. And then I get an overall idea, and also mirror is a small space. So if you move, you cannot see how the overall thing went. In video recording, that's better. So that is something I generally do. With any other presentation, majority of the presentation that I recently participated or won, most of them were completely online. So it was mostly through Zoom, and there was not enough movement. But I did participate in 3MP in 2019, and the winner that year was Jacob, and Jacob's presentation was kind of pretty much everything that we were talking about, like how movement and how to kind of find a hook and try avoiding jargons when you cannot avoid jargons, kind of giving a brief introduction to those so that they understand what that is, keeping the slides. So I would recommend anyone who is interested to kind of check this presentation. That's really good.
Sure. Marina, I know you covered most of the points on this before, but do you have any last minute suggestions, thoughts on this?
It's more of a question actually. I think that if you get a chance before your presentation to go and check out the space where you're going to be presenting, I think that's really good because you get familiar with the setting. If you're presenting on stage and you're not used to being on stage, it can be like a huge difference as to like practicing in your living room, right? So I don't know if participants can have an opportunity to do that, go like and visit the space ahead of time. But I think that if that's an option, that's a good thing to do. So it's not really an advice or anything, but.
Awesome. How about Marcello, you go next.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess in terms of overcoming or controlling public speaking anxiety, I've personally always found that the best antidote for that is practice, practice, and practice. I mean, some people are naturally just more confident when they speak than others. Of course, knowing your material well will help go a long way with that as well. But by just participating in 3-minute thesis, you'll overcome that anxiety. If not before then, definitely afterwards.
Awesome. Niranjan, any advice?
I think I agree with what Marina said. If you have a chance to look at the venue where you're presenting, it helps a lot to reduce that anxiety of where you're presenting.
Did you have the option to do that?
I presented in the Mub Ballroom, and the first time I presented, I did not have an opportunity to go there. But I was in a different room, so I had an idea of how the venue looked like. Although I didn't go and do a dry run there, I did it in a classroom setting.
Okay, nice. Good to know. Nanad?
Like for last minute, just one piece of very specific advice. If somebody out there is like me, who also so I tend to speak fast, and when I was practicing to make sure that I kind of modulate my pace so that I don't essentially I was trying to speak slowly. What happened on the day of the event is that I started my talk, it was going really well, and I completely forgot to look at the clock until I had like 40 seconds remaining. And I realized that it was not enough time. I mean, I practiced my pace, right? But on that day, things can change a little bit. So just the one advice is to just keep an eye out on the clock as well, so that you're that you're on schedule in your.
That's the one thing with 3MT. How much ever good presentation you do, you have to make sure that it is within 3 minutes, otherwise you get disqualified. So yeah, I think those are really valuable inputs. And we are almost to the end of our panel discussion. We are happy to take questions from the audience. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. If you want to know something from a specific panelist, just put an @ and their name, or any of the panelists are free to answer those questions. So we have one question already in here. From Oindabi Mukherjee. She says, is it useful to at all to pose questions to gain attention?
I guess I could take that one.
Sure.
So questions, whether like a direct question that you're asking the audience or a rhetorical question where you're not really asking, but you're more like using a question as a way to have people think, are very common attention getters. And I think it can backfire. So I think they can be really effective. I also think they can backfire if you're asking a direct question to your audience. You might not always be able to anticipate correctly what your audience is going to actually respond. And then what I see a lot is people asking a question to get the audience's attention, but then they don't really know how to bounce from that. So you ask a question and the audience says like raise their hand or whatever, and you just like, okay, cool, and you move on without necessarily making a connection with the actual like content of your speech. So if it's just like asking a question to ask a question as an attention getter, and you don't tie it closely to what follows, I would say pick another attention getter, like an image, quick visualization, even a quote if you want. But if you're comfortable with interacting with your audience and maybe having some unanticipated responses, then that can be a really good way of grabbing attention. That's just my take on it, my observations.
Awesome, thank you. Any other thoughts from other panelists on this question? All right, we'll wait a few more minutes to see if somebody else wants to put a question. But I have one question since I don't see any in here. So when you are timing your 3MT presentation, the 3-minute clock is very important. And just now Nanad mentioned that even after you practice on the day of the event, it can mess up your pace of talking. Do you think practicing it by leaving a few minutes at the end work, or does that confuse you if you are not able to get through it, or you finish too early than you expected?
I can share my trick.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, what I do is I do not time the full presentation itself, but I time the block of text. So I know which parts are important. So I'll probably block like every 15, 20 seconds. And I'll know that by the end of 2 minutes where I should be and how much like slow or fast I'm going. Based on that, I'll modify during the presentation. And towards the end, I generally keep the introduction, because when you are on stage, before your presentation, the MC introduces yourself. So you don't have to start by saying, hey, I'm this is my presentation is all about. You can keep that part for the end. That saves some time. And generally keep like some blocks of text that in case you have time, you'll say. Otherwise, if you do not say them, it's completely okay. True. So I would say that way where you are, and then generally if you know where you are and how fast or slow you need to go, it reduces the overall stress as well. And if I just drop one block of text, I'll be on time. So that helps.
Good to know. Any other insights from the panelists on this?
As I mentioned earlier, I had a written script of close to 350 words, and I divided that as the introductory 30 seconds, where I talk about the general research and then describe. And the last 30 seconds is when I try to complete the story. So the way I arranged my talk was first 30 seconds, I'll speak about I'll relate the audience to the research. And next 2 minutes, I'll explain it. Wherein at the end of 2 minutes, we have the timer there just opposite to us. So we'll be watching that. And once I reach once there is 30 seconds remaining, even if I'm describing something and I have crossed my time, I'll come to the conclusion section. I had a sentence which I kind of memorized that. So I start that sentence at the start of the last 30 seconds. And I tried to conclude that. So whatever the description was, even if I was slightly overshooting the time, I kind of practiced it in such a way that the last 30 seconds, that sentence has to start at the last 30th second and then conclude the talk essentially. So whatever the description or explanation was, stop at that particular time. So my talk was, I divided into 3 parts: first 30 seconds, 2 minutes, last 30 seconds.
Okay, sounds good. Any other insights? I see more questions populating in the chat window. If there are no more insights from the panelists, I'll move on to those questions. Okay, so Yasasya is asking, when I make conclusion at the end, do I need to wrap up with the hook that you started with, or can it be just the conclusion and results of the research?
I can answer that one.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found with that, I used to put that into the context is generally at the start of your presentation, in most cases, maybe you have some larger question that you're trying to answer, some big idea that maybe your research can solve. So when you narrow down to what your thesis or research is, at the very end, you should probably try putting it back into the context of what you originally described your problem was. So you narrow down and then you widen out again. I think that's called a book ending is the proper term for that.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer that, you kind of have a little bit of both going on there, but you should always kind of put your research in the context of a big picture so the audience understands why your conclusions are important.
Thanks, Marcello. Any other thoughts on this question?
I second that completely.
Mhm. All right. If not, I'll move on to the next question. So I think this is specifically focused towards Niranjan. Marcello, are you graduated or are you still a current student here?
Current student.
Okay, okay. So I think this is specifically for Niranjan. Uh, Shrey is asking, since you have already defended, did the 3MT preparation or the concepts you used for it help in your defense?
Short answer, no. Defense presentation is you're more, you are evaluated more on your technical aspects, on your research, on your new addition to the research. And the people in the committee, I mean, there would be people from your friends who are from other departments, but the prime main focus of that talk or the presentation is more towards your technical accomplishments rather than your storytelling abilities.
Awesome. So I don't see any more questions coming in the chat. Okay, there is one from Oindabi. Did 3MT help you in any other aspect? I think this is again towards you, Niranjan.
Help in any other aspect? I think sometimes we, as researchers, we are very focused in a small area, and we sometimes lose track of the larger picture, or we do not concentrate much on the larger picture. Sometimes it helps to bring our research in perspective when we talk to diverse people or people who have no idea of our research. It's almost like just talking to someone who has absolutely no idea, and who would be like, so what's so great about your research? So it helps to communicate to the non-technical audience or anyone who has no knowledge of your research, and it helps to bring that perspective.
Awesome. So
I second.
go ahead.
Do you want to add quickly something?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think exactly on that point. In the introduction, it says it's an elevator pitch.
Mhm.
So that elevator pitch, when you are making networks, it actually helps, because when you are just randomly bumping into someone, they probably not know your research in detail. So if you use a jargon, they won't understand. But kind of trying to make connections and networks and communicate with people, that skill is very valuable, that one can learn through 3MT or some similar competitions. I think that's very useful too.
Mm-hmm. So we are almost at 7 o'clock. Any other insights from the panelists? All right. Thank you so much to all the panelists today for coming here and sharing their experience. It was a great learning opportunity, and I'm very sure that it will be useful to all the participants in prepping up for 3MT and also similar competitions ahead. Thank you for taking out the time and sharing your ideas and thoughts on all of the curious questions that we got from audience, as well as the ones that we populated before. Thank you so much for coming in here tonight. With that, I think I'll end this session.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting, and good luck to all the participants.
Yeah, thank you for inviting. Bye.
Bye-bye.